Introduction to Strategic Behavior in Oligopoly. Okay, we're going to go back to some of the material from last week, from our previous section on various models of profit maximization. You remember we had these four different market structures: perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. And we went over perfect competition and monopoly as the sort of extreme cases and said that monopolistic competition was probably much more realistic. Well, now we're going to talk about another one of those intermediate cases, oligopoly, which differs from monopolistic competition to the extent that there are a few competitors in the market rather than many as in monopolistic competition, where a product can be either homogeneous, that is identical, or it can be differentiated from everyone else's, where entry is difficult, and we have strong control over price, but notice it says limit, but that control over price is limited by the actions of other firms. We're going to see that that is the key distinction between oligopoly and all the other market structures. And the reason I've kept this section until the end, because it's a very different way of looking at firm behavior. So we say that there are many, but not a large number of firms in monopolistic competition, while there are few, but more than one firm in oligopoly. This means that markets are much more concentrated in oligopoly than in monopolistic competition. And as a result, firms are capable of thinking about what their competitors are going to do whenever they make a decision. When firms pay attention to what other firms are doing, we start applying a different form of economic analysis from anything we've seen before in the course, something called game theory. Now, game theory is a very, very complex and very broad topic, so we don't have time to really get into it in this course. But here's the central concept in game theory. Each firm chooses the best thing it could do, assuming that everyone else is doing the best thing that they could do. And when all firms behave in this way, the situation is referred to as a Nash equilibrium. It's named for John Nash, who was a very famous mathematician who came up with this idea. So you can see that what we essentially have here is firms thinking strategically about what other firms are doing, assuming that the other firms are doing the same thing. That's very different from what we've looked at so far. Notice we haven't mentioned one word about cost curves or marginal product in this discussion so far. Okay, so here's a very simple example of strategic behavior that we think of in a game theoretic sense. This is a common situation we see every day. Two gas stations at the same intersection across the street from each other. How do they decide what price to charge? Each knows that they must consider what the other one is doing. Both would be better off if they kept their prices high. But the worst for either of them is if they kept their price high, but the other station dropped their price. Then everyone would buy from the other guy, and no one would buy from you. So they both drop their price to the lowest that they can. Likewise, if wholesale prices start going up, the two stations move together, and when they decide to finally raise their prices, neither one wants to be out ahead of the other. That's strategic behavior in a game theoretic sense. When two firms take the behavior of the other firm into account when formulating their strategy, this is sometimes referred to by economists as tacit collusion. Collusion is when firms work together to set price, and tacit collusion means that they're kind of doing it without actually coordinating, because they're just thinking about each other's best strategic behavior. But when they take the behavior of the competitors into account, They can do that on all aspects of their business, scale of production, price, etc. Not just not thinking about price alone, but also about how much they produce. Notice that firms don't have to communicate with each other to do this. They just assume the other guy is as smart as they are. And they don't even have to talk to each other about what they're going to do. As a consequence, this behavior is perfectly legal. There's no way we could make a law against people running their companies in a way that was just being strategic. But in general, the application of this model in an oligopoly market structure leaves firms with positive profits. The profits, however, are lower than if the market were dominated by a monopoly. Here's another situation where we can think about strategic behavior in a game theoretic sense. Sometimes there's one firm that's big enough that they could be the leader in the market. Then everyone else just follows them and does what they do. Once again, there's no one issues any instructions about doing this. They all just know that this is the best they could do given what everyone else is doing. And as a consequence, this behavior is once again completely legal. However, when firms start communicating with each other, when they actually start colluding, then they're getting into something called explicit collusion, which is not legal. That's what we'll talk about in part two.